Welcome to The Arch, a podcast produced by the Tam News for sharing and promoting all the great things happening in the Tam High community. I'm your host, Emerson Swift, and today's episode features one of Tam's very own English teachers, Tara Seekins. This year, she teaches English 3-4 and American Literature and World Literature. In February, Miss Seekins traveled to New Delhi, India on a Fulbright Scholarship. She's here today to tell us about it. Hi, Miss Seekins. Thank you for being on our podcast today.
My pleasure.
So I was wondering if you could start us off by telling us a little bit about the Fulbright program.
Sure. So the Fulbright program focuses on cultural exchange, and in particular academic cultural exchange between students, graduate students, university faculty, and teachers from the United States and from other countries that the United States is partnering with. And that can vary from year to year. But this year I was participating in the Distinguished Awards in Teaching program, where there was a cohort of about 20 of us American teachers who had projects in different countries around the world, but they're all focused on, what can we learn from what other educators are doing in other parts of the world and bring back best practices and interesting strategies that we can incorporate into the content that we are developing for our students. And promote cultural exchange, right? Promote like friendship and collaboration between teachers from the United States and teachers from lots of other different countries around the world. So it's really cool. It's a really neat program.
Yeah, it sounds awesome.
Yeah.
So why did you decide to apply?
Well, because I'm interested in cultural exchange generally. I'm really interested in bringing kind of a global perspective into all of the literature classes I teach, and I'm also teaching world literature, right? Like they started a new class this past year. Previously, in the spring, American Lit had been paired with 20th century Lit, and now it's paired with World Lit. So I was interested to have that opportunity to develop some curriculum for that particular class. But I really see my goal as a teacher to bring more of the world to my students, right, and help them feel more like citizens of the world. So I'm involved with a few other different organizations that are focused on, international education and cultural exchange and dialogue. So this was kind of an extension of that interest.
And what led you to choose India?
So I'm really interested in 3 different writers and incorporating content that they've created into the World Lit class at TAM. So one is Arundhati Roy, super famous. You probably maybe read her work or come across it. Another is Geeta Hariharan, and then another is Jhumpa Lahiri. And I teach Jhumpa Lahiri and Arundhati Roy already. And I was really interested in getting more context about how these authors are taught in an Indian context, for example. All 3, I would say, are probably representative more of the Indian diaspora rather than India itself, although Roy, as I'm thinking about it now, does live in Delhi. But yeah, I was interested to see what that looked like in context of an English department in India. And so I was in residence at a college called Indraprastha College for Women. It's a college of Delhi University. And in fact, I was in residence in their English department, where they do a lot of interesting work with counter-narrative, counter-storytelling, undertold stories, underreported, right, kind of narratives. And at the college, I wasn't taking classes or anything like that. I was more co-teaching and talking with faculty and talking with students. And so I was really excited to be able to see how they're teaching that content and then incorporate some of those strategies into the instructional units that I'm creating for the World Lit class at TAM. But yeah, India was amazing. Also, I hadn't been there, and I was super excited to explore a new place.
Yeah, we do learn a lot about counter narratives in your class. So that's cool that you were learning about it and then teaching us.
Exactly. Well, I think it's kind of developmental. I think that adolescents, teenagers are kind of hardwired to question authority. Is that really true? Is there a story behind the story, right? And when we as teachers can activate the idea of counter narratives that question or challenge dominant narratives, I think students are more likely to tune in and engage, right? It's another way, it's another level of like engaging with a particular text, thinking about how it talks back to previous texts. And if you're going to study counter narratives effectively, then you have to understand what the master or dominant narratives are, right? So it opens a lot of different windows, and I think, in some ways is like more appealing to students than just kind of, we're going to read this book and talk about what it means. Like, it's more about this book in context, right?
Yeah, I understand that. Yeah. Just a little bit of background about like this next question. So I understand there have been some incidents at the women's colleges in the University of Delhi, including one this year actually on March 28th at an annual college festival. And for those of you who don't know, drunken men groped, catcalled, and harassed women, and eventually they were escorted back to their rooms and ordered to lock their doors while the men roamed free on campus. This is according to Vice, that the police didn't arrive until 2 hours later. And this isn't the first time this has happened on a University of Delhi women's college campus. So could you tell us more about events like these and what you witness as students are attempting to fight back?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think what the first thing that's important to understand is that there, particularly at Indraprastha College, there is a strong history of student activism. Starting with as far back as I could go, I kind of did some work in the college archives around this. There was a group of students that were active in India's fight for independence from British rule, who were active in like the 1920s and 1930s, calling themselves the Zinnia Patrol, and refusing to salute the Union Jack and replacing their official slogan with "God save everybody" rather than "God save the king" or "God save the queen." There's a long history of student activism at Indraprastha College and at other colleges of the University of Delhi. So I will say that there's that long context. In the 1970s, there was a lot of activism around anti-dowry crime and violence against women as well. That took the form of street theater. I think we talked a little bit about that as well, right? Where students were really trying to raise awareness in the broader consciousness, and in fact did, and were successful in creating legislative change, right? Laws that previously kind of did not recognize dowry crime as actual crime. They thought of it as like an interpersonal or interfamily dispute, now are used to prosecute the violence that results from dowry disputes, for example. So this has a long history, and it has been impactful and it has been effective. So what's happening now, and what's happened I think 3 times at Gargi College, at Miranda House College, and now at IP College, at Indraprastha College, is that you're right, the cultural festivals have been in some ways, I guess you could say, crashed by groups of male students and possibly people who are not students, who seem to have kind of the agenda of crashing into these events at women's colleges. And the colleges are not like the colleges here. UC Berkeley, you can kind of anybody can wander onto the campus and have a picnic, right? That's not how it is in Delhi. The colleges are walled off. There's a different level of security.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so they're not just coming in from different entrances. They're crashing through the entrance that they're not supposed to go in, or climbing over the walls, right, into these women's colleges, and then kind of having this really aggressive, what appears to be systematic violence of catcalling, other forms of sexual harassment, other forms of sexual assault. So yeah, it's really challenging. So that happened on March 28th, 2023 at the Shruti Cultural Festival at IP College. And the students, after the shock of that trauma, started really organizing. They had multiple peaceful demonstrations over multiple days, really trying to raise awareness about this issue, and hopefully calling for accountability for the perpetrators of this violence. It kind of, remains to be seen what the effect of that activism will be. But thinking about the legacy of activism of students from Indraprastha College and their successes in the past, I am optimistic that this will bring about meaningful change. It was really inspiring to see the students' passion around advocating against this form of violence against women.
And I understand you wrote about this in your final project that you just showed me.
My research report, yeah.
Yeah. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. So every teacher who completes the Fulbright Distinguished Teachers Award program completes a research report. So in my case, the report talks about kind of the theoretical framework for the project around counter-narratives, counter-storytelling. It states my research questions around identifying and rejecting single stories. It kind of problematizes the concept of world literature. Like, what are we even doing when we make this terminology? Like, what is world and what is not world? Like, the United States is part of the world, but why is it American and then world, right? Is world other? Like, really kind of problematizing that terminology. Framing what some scholars call the cultural imperialism of English, right? Kind of thinking about the fact that I'm teaching books written by people from many different parts of the world, but it's always in English, whether it's in translation or originally written in English, like problematizing the idea of cultural imperialism of English, as well as thinking about like what some scholars say is necessary, right? That we need to write in a language that many people understand in order to have our messages heard. Right, so it's complex. The other thing that I looked at in my research report were kind of the intersections of art and activism in Delhi's multidisciplinary art spaces. So looking at how art and activism are intersecting around theater, around music performances, film. It was a really interesting part of the project. So I was going to lots of different art spaces and talking with people and kind of exploring what they were doing in terms of art and activism.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
So, what was one of your favorite memories from India or something that you learned there?
I mean, all of my favorite memories, I can think of like multiple different things, but they all had to do with just connecting with people, right? I think like one of the things that I really learned in India is like how different people communicate, even in an academic context. So one thing that I was talking to a friend about was this idea that Indian people that I was talking to seemed to be really good listeners, and not just to me, but to each other. Like when I was listening to Indian students talk with each other at Indraprastha College, like they really seemed to want to understand what the other person was saying. And I was contrasting that with sometimes how I feel when I'm talking to people or listening to people in the United States. Like our conversations are pretty efficient. Like we kind of hit our bullet points and then we're kind of done.
Yeah, it's like, okay, great conversation.
Yeah, and like that's been kind of fun. Observing cultural differences. Anytime you travel and you start to see really interesting cultural differences. And it's not good or bad, it's just important, I think, to have those experiences of understanding that there are different ways of being, different ways of living life, different ways of interacting.
That's the perfect segue into the next question. You wouldn't even believe it. So I was going to ask, could you describe traveling to, exploring, and most importantly, respecting a different culture? And Tam High is located in Mill Valley, and it's such a bubble. And so many students grow up not getting exposed to other cultures and could end up disrespecting them. So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about that.
I think it's really helpful when you're traveling, especially when you're working abroad or like connecting with colleagues in more than just a kind of traveling through or tourism kind of way. It's very natural to have feelings of judgment, right? That's weird. That's gross. That's not how I would do it. This is slow. Like, there's better ways to do this. But I also think that one thing that's really important is to, like, when those kind of judgments happen, like, hold them in a space that is not where you don't express them. And you also think critically about them. Because everything that seems to me maybe initially weird or gross or wrong or inefficient might have a different purpose that I just don't understand because I'm not well informed. Do you know what I mean? And having that experience of being in a place where you have to acknowledge what you don't know is so important. And here's an example, all right?
Yeah,
so
I'm ready.
Okay, so in Hindi, the way you say yes is you go, So if you hear that as an English speaker in the United States, like if you said to me like, what do you think about getting coffee after class? And I said, what would you think I was communicating?
I would think you were thinking about it or being like, I don't know.
Like skeptical, right?
Yeah.
I don't know about going out to college.
Yeah,
right?
very skeptical.
Okay. But in Hindi, it means yes. So if I asked a colleague, would you like to go get a cup of coffee after class? And they go, they would be saying, I totally want to go, right?
Yeah.
So, but I didn't know that initially. And nobody was really speaking Hindi to me. Everybody was speaking English to me. But I would hear like my advisor, for example, on the phone with other people, and she'd be like, I'd hear her end of the conversation, and she'd just be going, like all the time. And I was like, why is she so rude to the people she's talking to on the phone, right?
Yeah.
Like, she's like skeptical of everybody, like doesn't like what they have
real
to say.
judgment.
And then I learned days later that she was agreeing with them. She was being nice. Yes, 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 was what I was hearing, but it's not what I thought I was hearing, right?
Yeah.
So instead of thinking, oh, this person's like not very nice, and acting on that, I had to hold that judgment in reserve until I had more information that I could filter it through and then be more accurate in my perception. But my initial perception was wrong.
Yeah.
Right? Like it was the opposite of
Yeah.
of accurate, like in a very literal sense. So, but those experiences are so important to have as we are thinking about just like the way we move through the world. Like, what else am I missing, right? What else am I wrong about? What else do I think I know for certain that I need to question? I think that's the most important lesson of exploration and travel.
Okay, yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you for the stories.
Yeah, sure.
So interesting. So going back to kind of about the world literature class at TAM,
Sure.
which a little background is an elective paired with American literature, right?
Somewhat problematically.
Yeah. So what, if anything, is going to change about the world literature curriculum, like next year or in coming years?
Well, everything is going to change because it's new, right? It didn't exist until this year in a kind of a prototype way. I mean, I wasn't here to teach it in the spring. So what's changing is that it's going to exist. And I'm still in the process of figuring out like what books I want to teach. The framework is going to be around counter storytelling, around language and kind of like complicated questions around, language dominance, for example. And I hope it's going to include a novel, I think a selection of plays and short stories and poetry. So I'm hoping that it will be engaging in that regard, and I'm hoping also to include a lot of secondary resources related to other art forms that might help to illuminate the contours of the literature that we're reading. So the example instructional unit on the God of Small Things includes connections to visual arts like painting, dramatic arts, as well as art and activism, street theater, for example, in Delhi. So I'm really trying to kind of incorporate like additional multidisciplinary artistic resources into the literature unit. And for example, like on Monday classes, like where we have those short classes, so students can kind of take a break from the novel and explore something related to the novel that is a different discipline.
Yeah, I know those Monday classes are helpful for me personally. Cool.
Yeah, like looking at primary source documents or like something that's related but not exactly, the book itself.
So I know we, hopefully, fingers crossed, have some students listening today. So what is one reason they should take American and world literature?
Well, if students are interested in exposure to some interesting books and want to engage in conversations about them in a pretty relaxed environment, like that's a good reason. They're not AP classes, like they're not heavy on work outside of class, things like that. But really, I put a lot of work into creating valuable learning experiences around books that I really love. If that sounds of interest to students, like I obviously think that's why we take literature classes, to explore ideas and engage with beautiful novels and think about, hopefully become like better people, right? But that's a little heady probably for for 11th and 12th grade, I'm not sure. Students might choose to take these classes for lots of different reasons.
Well, I mean, we're kind of wrapping it up here. Do you have any final thoughts?
I hope that we're able to encourage intercultural dialogue in many different ways between our students and students in other parts of the world. And I'm encouraged by some of the students in my class have signed up already as like a conversation partner with the nonprofit organization One Prosper that's connecting English-speaking students in the United States with students who are learning English in government schools in Delhi. I'm really encouraged by like students who are wanting to seek opportunities like that, and I'm really hoping that as a team of educators, we're just really kind of seeing as an important part of our job, creating opportunities for students to see themselves as citizens of the world. That is my hope.
Yeah, so could you just repeat the One Prosper opportunity for some people out there?
So there is a nonprofit organization that's actually, I think they're incorporated in San Francisco, and they pair students who are interested in improving their English skills, like students, particularly female students, and particularly students enrolled in government schools in Delhi, the national capital of India, with students who speak English as a first language. It's really helpful to have a language model that is just an accurate language model when you're learning. And often the teachers in Delhi's government schools that are teaching English classes are not particularly fluent in English, right? They know English and they know kind of the structure of the language, but in terms of modeling conversational English, that can be pretty challenging. It can be helpful to have a person who speaks English as a first language or second language doing that in that role. So the opportunity is 30 minutes a week for 10 weeks or something. And high school students can sign up to be part of that basically team, and then One Prosper matches that student with another student in Delhi, and they arrange a time to meet on Zoom and have conversations. I'm hoping that students, get involved next year. I'm thinking about offering extra credit actually for students who want to do it. So, yeah.
So if you're interested, you can go talk to Miss Seekins about the One Prosper opportunity.
Yeah, oneprosper.org.
Okay. oneprosper.org. Okay, thank you so much.
No problem. My pleasure. It was really nice talking with you, Emerson.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to shout out Kira Ferguson for designing our logo, Miss Black, the Tam News Advisor, for helping with the production, and especially Miss Seekins for being our very first guest on the podcast. This is Emerson from the Arch, and thank you for tuning in.